couple years ago, I met this lady who was so enthusiastic about the church that I was leading at the time. This was a number of years ago. I was a pastor of a small church, and we were trying to do some new things. We were trying to raise the spiritual temperature of the church. We were trying to get more people involved and get a higher attendance, different kinds of things. And so we started this thing that we called the grand reopening, and we were going to just basically start over as a church. The church was almost like 50 years old, and we decided it's time for a fresh start. So we're just going to restart some things. And on the month that we were doing this grand reopening, as we were like preparing for it, this lady came after service one Sunday, and she was just beaming with excitement and enthusiasm coming out of her face. I mean, it was almost literal. I had to step back. She and her husband had been part of this one church, and they decided that it wasn't the right church for them anymore. They were going to try to switch churches. And so on this particular Sunday, her husband went to one place, and she came to our church where we were. And at the end of the service, because they were trying to do the research by divide and conquer sort of situation. At the end of the service, she came up to me and she's just thrilled. She's just excited. She's just saying, "This is the place for us. I'm so exuberant." She had read the website. She kind of knew what we were about. She was excited and she was telling me all these things. And I was beginning to get freaked out, okay? Because usually when people do that, there's something that isn't quite right. And I was a little hesitant because most people, they say, "Hey, this is a good message." Or, "Hey, this is a nice church thing happening here." And she was like, "This is awesome. I want to come and help you and do things around here and involve myself and make this whole dream thing that your church is dreaming, make it all come true." And I was like, "Okay, arm's length. Let's take this step at a time. Let's just see where this goes." Anyway, her enthusiasm brought her husband the next week, and they started getting involved a little bit. And she and her husband invited my family over to their house, and they made us pancakes and this incredible breakfast. And it was the first time I'd ever been invited over to someone else's house for breakfast. Oftentimes it's dinner, but this was breakfast because she knew how to cook breakfast, and she wanted to just really treat us well. So we started developing this family friendship. I mean, her family and my family, we each had kids roughly the same age. And so we're starting to develop this connection, this relationship a little bit. And over the next couple of years, things are going pretty well. She and her husband got involved in the church. She particularly got a volunteer staff position, so we weren't paying her anything, but she was working hard. And so she was there doing some stuff at the church, and things were going pretty well. Attendance was kind of getting higher. The church finances were doing better. People in the church seemed to be growing in their relationship with God and getting a little bit more passionate about those things. I was really excited about all this. And then it worked really well until about a year and a half later, when I asked someone in the church to take on a particular responsibility that she thought she should have done. And she got offended at that. I mean, really offended at that. She believed that she was the person to do this particular job. And I had asked this other guy to do it, so clearly that must have meant that I didn't like her and that something was changing in our relationship and that I had a problem with her. And it really soured our relationship. It just completely flipped it upside down and backwards and weird. It got so weird and bad that she bought me a racquetball racket so that we could go and work our aggression out on the racquetball court. And it's a great racket, by the way. I love the racket, and I played with her and her husband. All three of us were out there. We were just working out our aggression, whacking that little rubber ball against the wall. It's a lot of fun, by the way, because you can just hit it as hard as you want, and it's going to stay in the room. So we had a good time, but it didn't resolve our relationship. Something was still messed up with our relationship. And I was confused about all that. It got so bad that Easter, one particular year, we had 173 people show up for our Easter service that year. And then the program that I asked the other person to lead instead of her was to start the next week after Easter. So Easter had this 173 attendance. The program that we started was the very next week. We got into that program, and a couple months into the program, it was like mid-July or something like that, I took a little vacation and wasn't at the church for a couple Sundays. And when I came back, there were 43 people there. I was like, what just happened? And in the meantime, she had been so frustrated with things in the church that she had started writing letters to people. and talking to people and sending emails and giving phone calls, telling people how the church was just dying and how I was the problem and all kinds of weird things like that. I was very confused. I was like, what's happening here? And it entered into a long, drawn-out process that took 18 more months after that for the church to figure out what really needed to happen. And I don't have time to get into all the details there, but there was a period of time there that I was insanely frustrated. And racquetball wasn't going to solve it. So this other friend of mine in the church, to try to cheer me up, gave me a psychological paper on narcissism. And the only thing I knew about narcissism up until that point was the line in the movie, What About Bob? Where Robert Dreyfuss, or whoever it is, says he's the psychologist, and then Bill Murray's playing the crazy guy named Bob. And so Richard Dreyfuss says to someone about Bob's character, he says, he's a textbook narcissist. And now I'm reading the textbook. So I'm finding out, what is a narcissist? And I was confused. Why have I been given this assignment? Why have I been given this article? And I'm reading it, and it's amazing to me. Check this out. One of the things the article said was that people with narcissistic tendencies will gravitate towards someone they perceive to be an authority figure, someone they perceive to have authority, power, influence, something along those lines. The person with narcissistic tendencies will gravitate towards that person, do whatever it takes to get as close as possible as they can to that person, and then if something happens for the relationship to somehow threaten that person's sense of self-esteem, then it will immediately and irrevocably flip. The person that they've attached themselves to now is no longer the idol, it's now the enemy. And they will flip and turn the other direction and begin to do all kinds of things to undermine the person that they previously idolized. And I'm reading this article and I'm like, whoa, that's just crazy. That's just nuts, because all of the behaviors this article was talking about, this lady had done. And it threatened me a little bit because, well, it first liberated me because then I could blame her. I could be like, okay, she's a textbook narcissist. That's her problem. But my problem was that though the behaviors in that article pointed to her, the attitudes described in that article pointed to me. And this is partially my problem. I am a hypochondriac. If you mention any disease in the world and list off 2 or 3 symptoms, I'm convinced I have it. Mouth cancer? Yep, I've got it. Read the symptoms. There's a white spot in your mouth. Oh, I can find one if I push really hard right there. Yeah, so I am a hypochondriac. You give me any symptoms in the world, and there's been a moment in my life when I could say, yeah, that was true about me, so it must be true now. And then I'll go to the doctor, and they'll do all kinds of tests. I'm a messed up individual when it comes to that stuff. I need to remember never to read Wikipedia on any medical article whatsoever, because then I will clearly have every disease known to humankind. But so I'm reading this article and I'm thinking, narcissism, great, now I need to talk to a psychiatrist because I'm a narcissist as well. But on top of it, what it really did for me is it made me recognize that I don't think it's just me. I think narcissism is a problem we all have. This sense that I need to be someone of significance, the sense that I need to be recognized, the sense that I need people to respect me. In fact, I would go so far as to say that our own individual narcissism, however high or low the grade may be, it creates every relationship problem that we have. The person says something mean. Why do I get offended? Because I deserve better than that, right? A person cuts me off in traffic. Why do I get angry? Because I deserve to be treated better than that. Someone in the church isn't doing what I want them to do, and that bothers me. Why does that bother me? Because I deserve better. And it all comes back, my relationship problems with anyone in this world comes back to the fact that I believe I deserve to be treated better. I believe that I deserve to be respected more highly. I believe all these things about myself, and I think it's because we all have this idea that we deserve more. It's greatness, really. That's the word. See, for the past few weeks, we've been talking about the great news of the Gospel of Mark. And the great news is simply this: you're never going to be good enough for God, but Jesus died on the cross to pay for your sins. And he rose again to prove that his death was enough. And then he offers to you and me grace so that we can be forgiven of all those things. And that's good stuff. And we can take all that, and that's great news. We file that away into a compartment of our lives, and we call that the good news of God. We call that the message of Jesus. And that's a compartment in our lives. But great news isn't enough for us. We want greatness. We want people to recognize how good we are. We want people to know that we're really better than they think we are, because we really are better than all that. And that's what it boils down to. And when someone says something mean to me, I get upset because I deserve better. There are these two guys in the Gospel of Mark that pursue greatness exactly the way we do. And we're going to find out how Jesus deals with them. It's in Mark chapter 10. We've spent a lot of time in Mark 10 because Mark 10 is really a compressed set of verses that just really covers a lot that we need to understand from the message of Jesus. But we're going to go there today. Mark 10, beginning in verse 32. If you're using the Bibles that we passed out, it's on page 707 or somewhere near there. And we're going to find out about these two guys named James and John and how they're pursuing greatness and how it affects their relationships with Jesus and their relationship with other people, and learn some lessons from it. So we're going to start in verse 32. They, talking about the disciples and Jesus and all the people who were surrounding him, they were on their way up to Jerusalem with Jesus leading the way. And the disciples were astonished, while those who followed were afraid. Now, hang on there a second, because why should they be afraid to go to Jerusalem? Why should they be astonished that Jesus is going to Jerusalem? Well, it's kind of like this. If I said, I'm taking my family on a vacation next week to Gary, you would be astonished, right? You would be astonished. My family would be afraid. I don't know, maybe that's a bad illustration, but it's somewhere. If I were to simply say this, if I were to say, hey, we're going to some location, we're going to Indianapolis next week, and my family's afraid. We're going to Los Angeles next week, and my family's afraid. We're going to Africa next week, and my family's afraid. We're going to New York City, and my family's afraid. The fact that I add my family's afraid at the end of that phrase now lets you know what I'm expecting to come when I go to the place I'm going. Jesus